Our first conversation is gender violence. And you're only seeing two people here. Our third person, Andrea Turner, who is a Safe Place board president, had a family emergency, gave me a call last night, said she couldn't. And she said, would I do it because I'm the vice chair of a Safe Place? And what we wanted to do was, in all the talks about violence, and I'm going to give you a few little issues, few little things to kind of put us in perspective. We always talk about the problem, but what we don't talk about are the incredible things that people are doing as problem solving, as of being part of solutions to it. Gender violence is violence against women. You can talk about all forms of discrimination. The worst form of discrimination against women is violence against women and girls. So how do you move from talk to action? I wanted to read to you something very quickly that the UN, the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women, here's what they said. The Commission urges states to strongly condemn all forms of violence against women and girls and to refrain from invoking any custom, tradition, or religious consideration to avoid their obligations with respect to its elimination. These are marching orders that we all have. It added that states should devote particular attention to abolishing practices and legislation that discriminate against women or girls or perpetuate and condone violence against them. It's the next statement that is very interesting that we're going to talk about just briefly, is countries should address and eliminate as a matter of priority domestic violence. And the reason is we are looking to end a pandemic. And that's what they're looking at in terms of violence. And the idea is leadership for prevention, protection, and provision of services for survivors, awareness raising, and attitudinal change. Huge, huge agenda. Now, we're going to first talk a little bit about what's going on in domestic violence or intimate partner violence, which is more accurate, or family violence. You're going to hear more and more instead of domestic violence, because that's the latest. At Safe Place, which is a shelter for abused families and with their children, and in fact, a Safe Place was one of the few from the beginning, it's about maybe now 38 years, that brought in boys and teenage boys as part of the family, because many shelters would not let boys come in. The whole commitment was to keep the family together. Now, at a Safe Place, what makes them really very unique in terms of their domestic violence problem solving is, and family violence in particular, is not only when they started in the church building. It was first in San Francisco, and then a number of the women realized, there's a lot going on in the East Bay. And so they decided, there was a whole group of them, and they were young women at the time, 1978. And they crossed the bay and they began to set up, and they first thing they did was open up a telephone line, because that was the way to go. The next thing they did, they had a shelter. And the particular shelter building they were using was the Black Panther building. Black Panther gave them this building. It was an incredible building. And in fact, because of their commitment, everything was children's size throughout the building. That was just the beginning, and it's moved on since then. What we began to do is move in the shelter from looking at, and why I'm mentioning this about a Safe Place is really now being looked at across the nation as a milestone and as a place where really evolving the whole commitment of how you work with families and violence, whether you're going to a shelter or whether you just need that counseling. Because they not only have the shelter where there is total services provided, counseling services, as well as children's services, everything from mommy and me to even homework. But the whole idea is to begin to give women who needed a safe place, to begin to give back empower them, give back their self-sufficiency, and move on to the next place. We talk about violence and military violence and systemic issues and the whole other spectrum and government. But there was one issue that's come up, the comfort women issue, And people said, well, why are we talking about it? It happened a long time ago. And yet, this is an issue that needs to be talked about because it's emblematic of what's been going on what's going on right now in terms of war countries and the abuses against women and the systemic uses and the abuse of women and using war to abuse women. So in that, I have two really great people.
But I only have 1 minute, I understand. So I will make it very, very short, and I hope to the point. Gender, sexual slavery, and bias is with us from in the beginning of civilization. Why are we so concerned about this comfort women issue? The reason is because Japan is the only country in the world, in the history of the world, that institutionalized sexual slavery, institutionalized trading of women, girls, and sometimes boys in order to serve the soldiers in the military. This is why they call comfort women. They're supposed to comfort the men in the front line and the soldiers who are fighting. These girls, women, and sometimes boys were kidnapped from their homes at age very young, brought into sex slavery, and some of them have to serve soldiers about 5 to 60 a day even. And I understand from reading a book that actually Judith gave me that the death mortality rate of these women is 80% compared to the frontline soldiers of 20%. That's how badly the women suffered, the girls suffered. Why are we still talking about that today? And that's because Japan, as a country, has never acknowledged that Japan did that. Japan to this day denies it, never apologized to the women, and hope that the women would just go away, die off. We would not allow that. I've been a judge for over 32 years. Justice is in my heart, is in my soul. I want to broaden justice, not from just the court theater, but to the world theater. We need to be together to fight for the hideous crime, the horrible crime that was revealed when in the 90s, a woman, so-called comfort woman, told her story. She broke her silence. That was the first time the world heard about this horrible chapter in World War II. 5 minutes, I'm going to defer to her soon. And I just want to say that I'm really delighted to serve as a co-chair of this Comfort Women Justice Coalition, which is an organization of multinational, multi-ethnic human rights collaborative of over 20 organizations like yourselves, all come together to make sure that that chapter of history is never forgotten, because it's very important to remember what George Santayana said: those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. We can never forget the past, so we would never, ever allow that chapter of history to be repeated. I told you that there are over 200,000 women, girls, sometimes boys that were captured during World War II and served as sex slaves. Today, there are only 2 in Taiwan, 22 in China, a little bit over 40 in South Korea. They're all dying. This is why it is so urgent that we need to build something so people remember. In San Francisco, the Board of Supervisors passed a resolution resolving to never forget this and to build a memorial on public land in San Francisco. This is what we're working so hard on. I hate to tell you this, but Japan is fighting us tooth and nail. Japan to this day is trying to tear down the memorial that is in front of the Japanese consulate in Korea. Why are they so afraid of the truth? Shame on them. Shame on them. I hope you will join us to make sure justice is done. Thank you.
Just to repeat a little bit of what Lillian said, the other day my daughter was talking to me and she said, how can we understand the present if we don't understand our past? And I think that's why I'm sure most of you here have heard of the Comfort Women. And I know for myself, people will come and say, why are you doing all this about the Comfort Women? And you know, so many things are happening today. And it's because, as Lillian said, the comfort women, it's not like this didn't happen before and isn't happening now. Women have been raped by soldiers and in wars forever. However, the Japanese institutionalized the enslavement and sexual enslavement of women to a degree that hadn't been seen before. It was the first time that a government actually sponsored rape by soldiers. It's the first time that they basically codified that men need to rape in order to go to war. They said men need comfort. And of course, other armies have said that, but it hasn't been institutionalized in the way it was. And after World War II, and they did so from 1936 to 1945. And it wasn't 200, it's coming out now that it was 500,000 women were involved from 11 countries. And the thing is that the institutionalization of this rape actually led to many things in the future. And the US and other countries looked at this, and in the Korean War, there were brothels that surrounded all of the military bases that still exist today. In the Vietnam War, rest and recreation, you know, sex and rock and roll that many people here have heard about, was institutionalized. All of these things, there's a direct relationship. And the World Trade Organization, the IMF, World Bank said sex tourism. They took this example and said sex tourism is something that we need to actually sponsor. It's part of the development of many of these countries. So when we look at trafficking, and there's a direct link between the comfort women and trafficking. When you deny history, as the Japanese government is now doing, you repeat it. I just read an article in the New York Times, which, you know, you can't always believe everything that they say, but they're saying between 2,500 and 3,500 are being sexually enslaved in Iraq. Thousands of women are being sexually trafficked and sexually enslaved in the war in Syria. So we can't eliminate this. When we talk about the comfort women, we're talking about the military, we're talking about wars, and we're talking about femicide. And so for us to build a memorial to the comfort women is to build a memorial to all women who have suffered during war. And we believe that to build a memorial to women and the comfort women is one step in having justice for all women.